The document they kept returning to wasn't a battle report. It was an inventory manifest. Supplies requisitioned by a single human forward operating unit over a period of 11 planetary rotations. The quantities made no sense. The Counselor of Vethara had read it 4 times, and each time her secondary cortex, the one evolved specifically for pattern recognition, simply stopped processing. Ration units for 12 soldiers. Medical kits rated for burn trauma. And at the bottom, almost as an afterthought, a line item that her translator rendered as extra laces boot quantity 40. 40 pairs of boot laces. For 12 soldiers. She didn't know what boots were for yet. Not really. Not in the way she was about to learn. The first thing Ambassador Cale Doran of the Sheth Collective reported when he returned from the human frontier was that the humans seemed tired. They look unwell, he transmitted to the Council. Their outer membrane shows damage. Several of them appear to be leaking biological fluid and continuing movement regardless. We believe they may be operating in a state of system failure. The Council received this with cautious relief. A species in system failure was a species that could be managed. They were wrong, but that particular correction would take 14 months and the destruction of 6 Sheth monitoring outposts before it arrived. And by then, the word *tired would never feel safe to use about humans again. The war had not begun cleanly. Most wars don't. The Sheth Collective had expanded their territorial boundary markers by 11 light minutes, a bureaucratic rounding, they said, a survey correction. The humans had 3 inhabited research stations inside that correction. When the Sheth sent administrative drones to begin relocation processing, the humans on Station Meridian 7 had locked the airlocks from the inside and transmitted a single response to the drone coordinator. We don't relocate. The drone coordinator had escalated. Standard protocol. The Sheth fleet arrived within 8 planetary cycles, 43 vessels, carrying enough disassembly capacity to convert the stations to recoverable materials in under an hour. Lieutenant Commander Sierra Vasquez had looked at the fleet on her display for exactly 11 seconds. Then she had begun making calls. "This is going to be bad," said Corporal Dmitry Olin from the seat beside her. He wasn't asking. He was 26 years old, had patched his left boot with adhesive tape twice in the last week, and had not slept in 31 hours. "It's going to be long," Vasquez said. "That's different." Olin looked at her. "Is it?" She didn't answer. She was already on the second call. What the Sheth fleet recorded in the next 4 minutes would later become the most analyzed communication fragment in Galactic Council history. Not because of what it contained, but because of what it didn't. The humans made no demands, issued no ultimatums, transmitted no threat assessment, no capability declaration, no formal escalation framework as required under Compact Article 7. They simply began moving. 2 resupply ships that had been docked at Meridian 7 undocked simultaneously, burning hard on courses that made no tactical sense. They weren't attacking. They weren't retreating. The Sheth fleet commander, precision-ranked Osavith, watched them diverge on a spread that would take them nowhere useful for weeks, and then realized slowly that weeks was exactly the point. "They are repositioning for an extended engagement," his tactical analyst reported. Osavith made his first mistake. Extended engagement implies they believe they can survive one. He ordered the disassembly of Station Meridian 7 to begin. It took 9 minutes. The station folded beautifully exactly as designed, and Osavith filed his report. "Humans retreated, stations reclaimed, no casualties on our side." He never filed another report, not because he died, but because nothing that happened next fit into any category his reporting system recognized. The Galactic Council heard about the human response 14 days later, and only because a Vetheran trade vessel happened to be passing through the Meridian corridor on an unrelated route. The captain of that vessel, a methodical administrator named Quarath, sent one transmission before immediately changing course and accelerating to maximum sustainable speed. The transmission was short. It contained no analysis, no context, and no recommendations. It was a visual feed. 43 ships. The Sheth fleet, the same fleet that had disassembled Station Meridian 7 in 9 clean minutes, was no longer a fleet. Several vessels were intact. Most were not. But what held the Council's attention, what made Councillor Vethara's secondary cortex shut down completely for the first time in her career, was not the damage. It was the asterisk time signature on the recording. The fleet had been destroyed over the course of 11 days, not in a single engagement, not through a decisive confrontation. The records showed minor skirmishes on day 2, a logistics interdiction on day 4, a communications disruption on day 6 that the Sheth engineers spent 19 hours repairing before something cut it again. Day 8, a Sheth vessel suffered a contained hull breach that the crew fixed, and then experienced an identical breach 6 hours later, and then a third breach in a different location the following morning. The Sheth fleet hadn't been defeated. It had been worn down. "They bled us," Osivith transmitted from the rescue vessel that recovered him, his voice carrying something the translator flagged as involuntary vocal tremor. "They didn't fight us. They kept coming back. Every time we repaired something, it broke again. Every time we secured a position, they were somewhere else. A pause. I don't think they slept." The Council reviewed this testimony in full chamber. Councillor Vethara was the one who finally said what everyone was thinking. Ambassador Kael'Doran reported they appeared to be in system failure. "Silence." "Perhaps," said the senior counselor of Methais Prime, very carefully, "we should revisit our definition of system failure." They sent an observer team. Naturally. That was what the Council did: observe, record, categorize, respond with precision. They embedded a small delegation with the human forces operating in the contested zone, under formal truce protocols that the humans agreed to with what the delegation described as asterisk suspicious speed. The lead observer was a Methian named Counselor-designate Harath. She was chosen for her emotional stability, her methodological precision, and her proven ability to function in high-stress environments. She was also chosen because she had specifically argued in open session that humanity was being mythologized, and that a clear-eyed field assessment would produce data sufficient to de-escalate the Council's growing institutional anxiety. She changed her position on day 3. The transmission that arrived from Harath's team was not a report. It was a recording, audio only, because her visual equipment had been destroyed in an incident she described as *a human repairing something that then exploded, which the humans described as a success. "I need to describe what I observed," Harath said, her voice carrying that same tremor the translator had flagged in Osivith's testimony. "Lieutenant Commander Vasquez held a session with her unit this morning. I observed it expecting a strategic briefing. It was not a strategic briefing. It was, I don't have the right category. They told stories about each other, personal histories, painful ones. A soldier named Olin talked about his family for approximately 20 minutes. Vasquez talked about a previous engagement in which she lost personnel. They were not processing trauma. I have seen trauma processing. This was something different. They were asterisk consolidating. I believe they were making each other harder to break." She stopped. "We need to revisit our behavioral models." The Council received this transmission and did not, for once, immediately convene. They sat with it. Vasquez knew they were being observed. She'd known since the delegation arrived. It didn't change anything. Nothing about their situation changed based on who was watching, because the situation was what it was. The Sheth had committed 9 additional fleet elements to the contested zone. The human reinforcement corridor was currently being disputed by 3 different Sheth interdiction patrols, and the forward units had been operating on reduced rations for 16 days. "We're not going to get resupply," Olin said. Not a question. He was eating something that had the caloric profile of food without any of the other qualities generally associated with it. "Not for a while." "How long?" Vasquez looked at her map. "Long enough that it matters." Olin chewed. "So what do? We make them regret the wait costs more than the ending." He looked at her. She had a wound on her left forearm that she'd sealed with adhesive tape because they'd run through the medical kits 3 days ago. Her eyes were clear. That was the thing about Vasquez, the thing Harith would later include in her final report, the observation that would be quoted in Galactic Council chambers for generations. Her eyes were always clear. Not calm. Clear. Like she had looked at the worst possible version of events and made her peace with operating inside it. "You're a deeply strange person," Olin said. "Yep," she said. "Let's go." The rehook, the thing that rewrote everything, came on day 19. Harith's team intercepted a communication that had been sent 17 days earlier, before the truce delegation arrived, before the Sheth committed additional fleet elements, before any of the visible military escalation that the Council had been tracking. The message had been sent by Vasquez on the day station Meridian 7 was destroyed. It was addressed not to her commanding officers, but to a human government logistics authority. And it contained one line that Harith's translator worked on for 6 hours before producing an output that Harith reviewed, then reviewed again, then transmitted to the Council with a personal note attached that simply read, "I believe we have fundamentally misunderstood the timeline." The message from Vasquez said, "Beginning the long plan. Confirm prepositioned resource chains are active." Prepositioned. The resupply ships that had undocked on day 1, the ones Osavith had dismissed as tactical repositioning, were not repositioning. They had been asterisk placed before the Sheth fleet arrived, before the disassembly of the station began, before anything the Council had identified as the inciting incident of this conflict. The humans had begun preparing for a long war before the Sheth had finished starting it. The Council convened in emergency session. "How far back does the preparation go?" the senior counselor of Methys Prime asked. It took 4 days to find the answer. The humans had placed logistics infrastructure in the contested corridor, not after the survey correction, not after the territorial dispute was filed, but after the asterisk original boundary expansion proposals were introduced into Sheth governmental debate. A debate the humans had no formal access to, conducted in a Sheth administrative language that no human translator was rated to process. "They shouldn't have known," Osavith said from recovery. "The debate was internal, classified at the second seal. There's no mechanism by which they could have." He stopped. "They watched us before we decided. They watched us and they started preparing before we decided." Harith transmitting from the field. "I don't think they anticipated the decision. I think they anticipated the kind asterisk of civilization that would make it." The silence in the council chamber lasted longer than was comfortable. Day 23. The Sheth interdiction patrols made a concerted push to close the reinforcement corridor permanently. It was a coordinated action, 4 fleet elements moving on a synchronized timeline, designed to collapse the human logistical network in a single operation. Vasquez's unit was directly in the path of the third element. Olin took a piece of shrapnel in the right shoulder during the initial exchange. He kept moving. Vasquez saw it happen, saw the impact, saw him stagger, saw him register the wound, and then watched him make a decision so fast it barely qualified as a decision. He reached into his kit with his left hand, sealed the entry point, and picked up his equipment with the arm he still had full use of. "I'm fine," he said before she asked. "I know," she said. The third element expected to pass through. Instead, it found that every route it modeled had already been seeded with interference, not weapons, not fortifications, but logistics denial. Fuel caches that should have existed didn't. Communication relay points produced false signals. The elements spent 11 hours navigating a corridor that had been quietly, patiently dismantled before they arrived. When they finally reached the position where Vasquez's unit should have been, they found evidence of recent occupation, a sealed ration container with 2 days of food still in it, and 40 bootlaces tied together in a single long cord, strung between 2 anchor points at exactly the height required to trip a Sheth soldier in low-visibility conditions. The fleet commander of the third element filed a damage report. Under the field labeled * nature of opposition, he wrote, "Unclear. The humans do not appear to be trying to win engagements. They appear to be trying to make each engagement cost more than it is worth." The council read this report. Then they read Harith's latest transmission, which had arrived in the same data packet. "They are not fighting us," she had written. "They are pricing us out. Every engagement we initiate, they make more expensive, not just in material, in time, in attention, in morale, in the administrative burden of continuing. I have been with this unit for 23 days. I have not once heard them discuss victory. I have heard them discuss sustainability. I have heard them discuss how long the Sheth can maintain this operational tempo before it becomes economically untenable. They are not planning to defeat us. They are planning to remain." The senior counselor set down the transmission. "What happens," he said quietly, to no one in particular, "when a civilization decides the cost of making humans stop is higher than whatever they were trying to take?" No one answered. No one had a category for it. Day 31. Olin's shoulder had healed enough that he could use both arms again. He was eating real food. The resupply had broken through, finally, 3 days after everyone had stopped expecting it. Vasquez was sleeping for the first time in 60 hours, 4 meters away, with the immediate, total unconsciousness of someone who had learned to take sleep like medicine. Harith sat across from Olin in the dim of the forward position. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He looked up, "Sure." "When did you decide you were going to stay?" "In the beginning, when the fleet arrived." Olin thought about it, not for long. About 11 seconds after Vasquez looked at the fleet. "What happened in those 11 seconds?" "She didn't leave," he said, "so I didn't." Harith processed this. Her translation system flagged the response as insufficient, incomplete causal chain, missing logical connective tissue. She overrode the flag. "Were you afraid?" "Yeah," he said. He wasn't embarrassed by it. "The whole time, still am." "Then why?" "Because afraid and stopped aren't the same thing," he said. "I think you think they're the same thing. They're not." Harith returned to her equipment and began to record, because she had just understood something that she needed to transmit before she lost the exact shape of it. She had been trying to understand humanity as a military force. She had been trying to understand their tactics, their logistics, their resource chains, their command architecture. She had been trying to understand what they were capable of. She had been asking the wrong question. They are not a military force that experiences fear, she transmitted that night. They are a fear-experiencing organism that has decided, collectively and individually, that fear is not sufficient reason to stop. There is no category in our threat assessment framework for an enemy whose operating principle is that surrender requires a justification they have not yet encountered. I am no longer certain they have a threshold. I am no longer certain they have modeled what their threshold would be. I believe, and I transmit this with full professional accountability, that they have not determined in advance how much they are willing to lose. They determine it as they go, and they keep revising upward. The Sheth Collective withdrew from the contested zone on day 44. Not because they were defeated. 3 of their 4 fleet elements remained combat capable. Their material losses were significant but survivable. They withdrew because their administrative council, after a 6-hour closed session, determined that the operational cost of continuing had exceeded any projected value of the territory under dispute. The boundary correction was quietly uncorrected. The survey data was revised. Station Meridian 7 was gone, but the other 2 stations remained, and the humans had already begun transmitting construction schedules. Vasquez received the withdrawal notification at 300 hours, local station time. She read it once, then she went back to sleep. Olin saw the notification when he woke up. He sat with it for a while, then he went to find Vasquez. "It's over," he said. She was already awake. She looked at him for a moment. "For now," she said. He nodded slowly. That was the thing he'd learned about her, the thing he'd learned about all of this. The math was always longer than the engagement. The preparation started before the provocation. The recovery started before the victory. Nothing was ever simply over. It was over for now asterisk, and for now asterisk was a resource you spent carefully. His shoulder ached. It would probably always ache a little. He was okay with that. In the Galactic Council's final assessment of the conflict, a document that would be revised 7 times over the next 3 years as new information emerged, the senior counselor of Methys Prime authored a single closing paragraph that all 9 council members signed, which was unprecedented. It read, "We assessed humanity as a young species, a minor power, a manageable variable. We observed their losses and believed we were measuring their limit. We were measuring their baseline. We observed their exhaustion and believed we were seeing the edge of their capability. We were seeing their operating condition. We do not know what it would require to make humanity stop. We have reviewed their history. We have modeled their decision frameworks. We have embedded observers who have lived beside them in the worst of conditions. The most accurate finding we can offer is this. Humanity does not appear to calculate a point of acceptable defeat. They calculate a point at which their enemy decides victory costs more than it is worth. They do not try to become unstoppable. They try to make stopping them too expensive. And they are, in this, more patient than anything we have encountered in 400 years of galactic governance. We recommend immediate reclassification. We recommend we do not start anything. We are not prepared to continue indefinitely. We recommend we remember the bootlaces." The document was sealed. The classification level assigned to it was the highest the Council used, the one reserved for existential considerations, not because humanity had destroyed a fleet, not because they had won a territory dispute, because 40 pairs of bootlaces in a requisition manifest for 12 soldiers finally meant something. They had known before the first shot that soldiers' boots would wear through. They had planned for the ground they intended to hold, not for the battle, not for the campaign, but for the long, patient, relentless act of asterisk remaining, before anyone had told them they would need to fight for it at all. The galaxy had spent 400 years learning what species were dangerous. It had never, until now, learned what it meant to encounter a species for whom stopping was simply not a conclusion